The Church of St. Aurelia held 12 candles on a Tuesday night. Nico Voss had counted them. He counted things when he needed his mind to stay in one place while his body did something it had not been trained for. Surveillance was trained. Standing in the back of a church, watching the woman he was supposed to protect, from herself hand an envelope to a stranger was not trained. It was something else. He had followed Serena Rinaldi for 3 nights. 3 nights of what he had been told was betrayal, looking very much like purpose. She moved without hesitation. She moved like a woman who knew exactly where she was going and why, which was not how a guilty person moved. Guilty people checked over their shoulders. Serena checked her watch. She had sold the bracelet 2 days ago, the ring the day before. She had deleted her calendar entries from the estate system. She had told the household staff she was visiting a friend. She had done all of it with the specific efficiency of someone managing a problem that could not be managed any other way. And now she was in a church at 11 at night, placing a thick envelope on the prayer table, and a man Nico had never seen in the Rinaldi files was stepping out of the shadows to take it. Nico moved. He came down the aisle with his hand already inside his coat. The stranger saw him first and went still. Serena did not turn around. He said, "Step away from the table." The stranger stepped back. Serena still did not turn. He raised his voice 1 degree. He said, "Serena." She turned then. Her eyes were calm in the specific way of someone who had been expecting this, not afraid of being caught, waiting for someone to ask the right question. He said, "Who is the money for?" He did not ask it like a question. She said, "Shoot me after you ask who the money is for." He said, "Who?" She looked at him. She said, "Your daughter." 3 days before the church, Matteo Rinaldi sat in his office and looked at photographs of his wife leaving the estate at 11:45 at night. He looked at them the way a man looked at something he did not want to be true and could not find a way to make untrue. Carlo Rinaldi stood across the desk. Carlo had run the estate's internal order for 11 years. He was precise, undemonstrative, and had never given Matteo a reason to doubt him in 11 years. He said, "A wife does not need to run to betray you. Sometimes she only needs to move money quietly." He said it gently. He said it like a man who was unhappy to be right. He said he was not suggesting a conclusion. He was presenting a concern. He advised Matteo not to confront Serena directly. He said if she had already planned a story, confronting her would only refine it. Better to watch, better to know. Matteo's father had been destroyed by a woman who moved money quietly. Matteo had been 17 when he understood what that meant. He had been in the house. He had heard his father's voice change when the truth was explained to him, the quality of it. The way a voice changed when a person understood that something they had trusted was hollow. He had watched his father spend the following 3 years dismantling everything he had built and rebuilding it on the assumption that trust was a liability. It had made his father harder. It had made him effective, and it had killed him at 54 from the specific accumulation of stress that came from never letting your guard down in your own house. Matteo had told himself he would not make the same mistake. He had built protocols. He had built systems. He had made sure that no single relationship could be the point of failure. And then he had given 11 years to a man who managed those systems, because 11 years of reliability looked like something it was not. 11 years of reliability was not proof of trustworthiness. It was proof that Carlo had not yet needed to use the position he had built. Matteo looked at the photographs. He looked at his wife. He looked at her in the photographs as someone else had photographed her, moving with purpose, moving like someone managing a problem, moving like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Matteo's father had been destroyed by a woman who moved money quietly. Matteo had been 17 when he understood what that meant. He had spent 20 years building a house where that could not happen. He called Nico. He said, "Follow her." He said, "Report only to me." He said, "I need to know before anyone else does." He said, "Tell no one else." He said, "Do not let her know." 2 days later, Carlo brought him an additional report. Serena had sold the ring, not pawned, sold. She had also removed 4 appointments from the estate calendar. Carlo placed the papers on the desk and said, "If you are going to hesitate, hesitate for 1 more day. After that, the family will be asking why you haven't acted." He said, "A boss who protects a guilty wife out of sentiment is not a boss. He is a demonstration." Matteo looked at the report. He had been preparing to call the full council. He had been almost certain. He was not quite certain. He told Carlo he needed 1 more day. Carlo said, "Of course." He left. Matteo sat with the papers for a long time after he left. Nico received the order and left the room. In the corridor, his private phone rang. He looked at the number. "Unknown," he answered. A voice said, "Watch the wife. Report everything, or Luna disappears." He stopped walking. He called the woman who looked after Luna on Tuesday nights. No answer. He called again. No answer. A photograph arrived. Luna sitting on a cot in an unfamiliar room, holding the brown bear she had slept with since she was 3 years old. She was not hurt. She did not know what was happening. She was 6 years old, and she was in a room he did not recognize, and she was holding her bear. A second message arrived. It said, "If Matteo Rinaldi hears her name, the girl is moved before sunrise." He stood in the corridor and did not move. The estate continued around him. A guard rotated at the far end of the hall. A household member crossed at the intersection. The building existed in its ordinary rhythm, and Nico stood inside it, holding a photograph of his daughter in a room he had never seen. Luna had been 6 for 3 weeks. He had taken her to the coast for her birthday. They had watched the boats come in, and she had named 4 of them, and he had written the names down in the notes application on his phone, because she was going to ask him later if he had remembered. He still had the note. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the bear in her arms. The bear was missing 1 eye. She had been upset about that for a month before he had told her that bears with 1 eye could see things that regular bears couldn't. She had believed him immediately. She had looked at the bear with new respect. He had that memory, and this photograph, and a corridor he needed to walk out of before someone saw his face. Nico stood in the corridor of the Rinaldi estate and understood what had been done to him. He had been given the same order by 2 different sources. Watch the wife. One source wanted to find the truth. The other source wanted to create it. And every emergency channel Nico had ever been trained to use went through Carlo's desk before it reached Matteo. Serena had noticed the change in Nico 4 days ago, not the surveillance. She had expected surveillance. She had noticed the specific quality of his silence. Nico was a quiet man, but this was a different kind of quiet. This was the quiet of a person carrying something that was going to break them if they carried it alone for much longer. She had seen that quiet before. She had lived in a version of it after her brother died. She had been 23 when her family received a ransom demand. Her brother had been 19. He had been working at a shipping office 3 blocks from their apartment. He had never been involved in anything that warranted what happened to him. Her father had reported it through the proper channels. The information reached the wrong person before it reached the right ones. Her brother was moved before the rescue team arrived. He was not found. She had carried that knowledge into the Rinaldi house when she married Matteo, a lesson she hoped never to need. They had reported it through the proper channels. The proper channels had told the wrong person. Her brother had been moved 4 hours before the rescue team arrived. He had not been found. She had spent 12 years knowing what it cost when you trusted the wrong chain of command with the wrong information at the wrong time. So when she began noticing signs that someone inside the Rinaldi estate had access to things they should not have had access to, she did not report it through the proper channels. She checked the Guard family welfare fund. The balance was wrong. She checked the access logs. The camera near Nico's neighborhood had been switched off using internal administrative credentials. She checked the message format in the security reports. Someone had used the internal duty rotation codes in a communication that did not appear in the official logs. She did not know who. She knew it was someone with access to 3 things: the welfare fund, the duty rotation schedule, and the internal reporting system. She had one person in mind. She could not prove it yet, and she could not say his name in the Rinaldi system without that person knowing she had said it. So she sold the bracelet. She sold the ring. She used Father Tomas and the Church of St. Aurelia because the church was outside the estate's camera network, and Father Tomas had never, in 30 years, told anyone who had knelt in his pews. She let Nico follow her because she needed him to see the path himself. A testimony you arrived at through your own eyes was a testimony no one could make you recant. She needed Nico to be a witness, not a target. In the church, after she said your daughter, she waited for him to make the choice she had been building toward for 10 days. He said, very slowly, do not use my daughter's name to save yourself. She said, I am using my jewels to save her because you were too loyal to ask for help. The stranger in the shadows cleared his throat. Nico looked at him. The man said his name was Elio. He said he had been told to pick up the envelope. He said he did not know the woman. He said he had been paid 200 euros to arrive at this location at this time and take whatever was on the prayer table. He said he did not know what was in the envelope. He said if it would help, he could describe the man who hired him. Father Tomas came out of the confessional. He said, she did not come here to confess. She came because this was the last place your enemies thought a Rinaldi wife would kneel for someone else's child. Nico looked at Serena. She held out a folded sheet of paper. He took it. It was a transfer schedule, dates and amounts, no recipient names. Just the pattern of how long each payment bought before the next deadline. She said, they told you to watch me. I let you. He said, why? She said, because if you saw the truth yourself, no one could make you testify against it. He turned the transfer schedule over. He turned it back. He said, "How long have you known about Nico?" She said, "I noticed Nico had changed about 4 days after Luna disappeared. I didn't know she was missing. I just knew something had broken in him." She said, "I recognized it." He said, "From before." She said, "From a long time before." Yes, the candles in the main nave had burned lower. He could see them through the arch from where he sat. 12 of them, she said. "We need to move. The next payment is in 18 hours. He stood. He said, "This ends with Luna coming home," she said. "That is the only way it ends." In the sacristy behind the altar, they spread the papers on the vestment table. Nico said, "You knew." He meant she knew about Luna. She said, "I noticed you had changed." I looked for the reason. She explained what she had found. The welfare fund balance was off by amounts that corresponded exactly to each of the payments Nico had been told would extend the deadline. The camera near his daughter's street had been disabled using credentials registered to the internal management tier. The messages Nico had received used a rotation code that was only distributed internally. Whoever had taken Luna was not outside the Rinaldi house. They were inside it. He said, "Carlo." She said, "I cannot prove it yet." She said, "Which is why I cannot tell Matteo." She looked at him. She said, "I was not hiding from my husband. I was hiding the child from the men inside his house." Nico sat down on the vestment bench. He had been standing for 3 days. He said, "I thought you were connected to it." She said, "I know." He said, "I almost." She said, "I know." She said, "A man with a gun can be ordered. A father with a missing child can be owned." She said it without accusation. She said it like someone describing how a mechanism worked. Nico looked at the transfer schedule. He thought about the message he had received. He thought about the shield oath he had taken when he joined Matteo's protection detail. Protect the boss. Report threats immediately. Do not let personal relationships compromise the mission. He said, "The oath says I should have reported this the moment I got that message." Serena said, "Yes." He said, "Carlo helped write the oath." Serena said nothing. She had been waiting for him to arrive at this. She had not wanted to say it first. A man who heard an accusation from someone else held it at arm's length. A man who put together the pieces himself held it differently. He said it again. Carlo helped write the shield oath. She put another paper on the table. It was the amendment proposal from 4 years ago. Carlo's signature at the bottom. The relevant clause read, "If a guard's family member is threatened and the guard fails to report immediately, the guard may be considered compromised and their testimony inadmissible in council proceedings." Nico read it twice. He said, "He built the trap into the rule." She said, "If you reported immediately, Luna would be moved. If you didn't report, you became compromised. Either way, your testimony against him was void before he even needed it." She said, "You were ordered to watch me betray him. You never asked who was forcing you to betray yourself." Nico looked at the paper for a long time. He said, "The money I'm supposed to be reporting. The payments you've been making." She said, "Each one bought 36 hours before the next deadline." He said, "How many do you have left?" She said, "1." He said, "Where?" She said, "Harbor Warehouse, Southeast Basin, tomorrow night." He said, "You're going?" She said, "Yes." He said, "I'm going with you," she said. "If you come with me, Carlo will know you've broken your orders. He'll move her before we get there. Nico said, "Then what do you suggest?" Serena said, "I suggest you send Matteo everything you have. Camera logs, fund records, the amendment, the rotation codes. Send it in a way Carlo cannot intercept." She looked at him. "And I suggest you let me walk into that warehouse while you wait until Matteo decides whether to believe you." He said, "That is not a plan. That is you as bait," she said, "because no child should pay the price for a man's oath." She left him with the papers. The harbor warehouse smelled of salt and old diesel, and the specific cold of large empty spaces at the edge of water. Serena had been inside for 11 minutes when Carlo arrived. He was alone. He was carrying a document. He did not look surprised to see her. He said, "You are too intelligent for this house sometimes." She said nothing. He put the document on the crate between them. It was a confession. Her name at the top. 3 paragraphs. The first said she had been receiving payments from the Ferrara network. The second said she had compromised the guard rotation by using Nico Voss as a courier. The third said she surrendered all claims to Rinaldi family property and requested quiet dissolution of her marriage in exchange for family safety. He said, "Sign it, and the girl comes home tonight." He said it simply. He said it like someone offering a reasonable resolution. He had the quality of calm that came from having planned something for a long time and finally being in the room where the plan executed. She looked at the document. She looked at the 3 paragraphs. She looked at the space for her signature at the bottom. She had walked into this building knowing this was what was waiting. She had walked in anyway because the alternative was another payment, another 36 hours, another cycle that ended when the money ran out, and the child disappeared into the next location. She said, "And if I don't," he said, "then the guard's testimony goes to the council, proving you recruited him, and you're tried for betrayal without the confession being necessary." She picked up the pen. She held it. She did not sign. She said, "You took money from the families of the men who protect this house." He said, "I managed a resource. The fund existed to give guards peace of mind. Peace of mind makes people predictable. Predictable people are easier to manage." She said, "You used children to make their fathers manageable." He said, "I used what was available." She said, "And the families who reported you," he said, "were removed from situations where they could continue to report." He said it without affect. He said it the way someone said something they had justified to themselves so many times that the justification had become its own kind of belief. He managed a resource. He maintained order. He protected the organization from guards who could be turned by outsiders. He had simply found a more efficient way to ensure no one turned them first. He said, "I managed a resource." She said, "You built a law to silence the people who would have reported you." He said, "I built order." She said, "You used a child." He said nothing. She put the pen down. She said, "Shoot me, or wait." Carlo reached for his phone. Nico came through the warehouse door. He was alone. Carlo said, "You just chose her over your boss." Nico said, "No. I chose the reason I ever swore to protect anyone." Carlo said, "Your testimony is inadmissible. You're compromised by the oath." Nico said, "Then it's lucky I sent the documents to someone whose testimony isn't." He looked at Serena. He said, "I sent everything, fund records, camera logs, the amendment, the rotation codes, all of it." He said, I don't know if he believed me yet. He positioned himself in front of Serena. Carlo looked at the door. Then Matteo came through it. He had gotten Nico's message 40 minutes earlier. He had read the fund records. He had looked at the camera log timestamps. He had looked at the Shield Oath Amendment and read Carlo's name at the bottom of the proposal. He had sat with that for 3 minutes before he called his men. 3 minutes because he had trusted Carlo for 11 years, and because 11 years of trust did not dissolve in 40 minutes, and because he needed to be certain before he did what came next. He had become certain. He did not come in fast. He came in the way a man came into a room when he already knew what he was going to find, and was still not ready to find it. He looked at Carlo. He looked at the confession on the crate. He looked at Serena. He looked at Nico standing between them. He said nothing for a long time. Carlo said, "Matteo." "She has been." Matteo said, "Where is the child?" Carlo said, "That has nothing to do with." Matteo said, "Where is the child?" Carlo said, "Room 4 in the adjacent building." 2 of Matteo's men went through the side door. Carlo looked at Matteo. He said, "Every record I have goes to 6 other people if I don't send a code in the next hour. Every family name, every guard with something to lose, the whole architecture." He said it like a last card. Matteo said, "Then they'll hear from me first." Carlo was taken before he could move toward his phone. In the adjacent building, Luna Voss was found in a room with a cot and a lamp and her brown bear. She was unhurt. She was hungry. She asked if her father was there. He was. He was in the room before the second man had time to report back. He crossed the floor without saying anything, and his daughter said "Papa," and that was the only word that had mattered for the last 4 days. Matteo waited in the warehouse. When Nico came back, his daughter was on his hip. She had fallen asleep against his shoulder in approximately 90 seconds. Matteo looked at them. He looked at Serena. He said, "I ordered him to watch my wife because I was afraid she would betray me." I never asked who had already betrayed him. Serena said nothing. Matteo said, "You should have told me." She said, "I tried to protect a child from the way your house handles fear." He was quiet. He said, "I would have believed you." She said, "Every report went through Carlo. You would have received it after he did." He had no answer for that, because she was right. Because he had built a house where the person managing the information was the person with the most to hide, and he had not looked at that structure in 11 years because Carlo had never given him a reason to. Until Serena had. They found the full account of it in Carlo's records over the following 3 days. The money removed from the Guard Family Welfare Fund over 4 years. The names of 7 other families who had been quietly pressured. The 2 guards who had been removed from service because their families had reported the pressure through the official channels and were told their guards were compromised. Matteo convened the council. He stood at the head of the table. He said no family of a Rinaldi guard was to be treated as a liability, a leverage point, or a test of loyalty. He said if a guard's family was threatened, protection came first and investigation came after. He said testimony given under family coercion was void, and the coercion itself was the crime. He said the welfare fund would be independently audited by someone outside the administrative tier. He said no clause of the Shield Oath could be used to silence a guard who reported a threat to his family. He signed all 5 amendments before the council session closed. Then he looked at Nico. He said, "You broke my order." Nico said, "No, I followed the part of it you forgot. I protected this family." Matteo looked at Serena. She was standing at the edge of the room. She was not at the table. She had not been asked to sit at the table. He said, "And you protected his." She said, "Then maybe your house should learn the difference between loyalty and leverage." She said it to the room. Not just to him. Outside, the harbor was gray and wet and ordinary. Nico walked to his car with his daughter, still asleep against his shoulder. Serena watched him go. She had sold 3 pieces of jewelry she would not get back. She had spent 10 days building a case no one had asked her to build. She had walked into a warehouse alone, because the alternative was a child waking up in an unfamiliar room, asking for a father who was not allowed to come. The child was not her child. The guard was not her responsibility beyond the basic human arithmetic of knowing a person was in trouble and having the particular tools to help them. She had the tools. She had the network. She had the knowledge of how to move money quietly, because she had grown up in a world where the official channels were sometimes the most dangerous route. She had used all of it. Not for herself, not for her position, not for any advantage that would come back to her. For a 6-year-old girl with a one-eyed bear who was asking where her father was. Serena stood at the edge of the harbor and looked at the water. The water did not care what had happened in the building behind her. It moved the same way it moved every night, regardless of what people were doing on the shore. It was just water. She found that clarifying. She had done all of this without being asked, without being thanked in advance, without knowing for certain that anyone was coming. Some things were done because they were right, not because anyone had made them mandatory. Matteo Rinaldi ordered his best bodyguard to watch his wife because he feared betrayal. But Nico Voss discovered that Serena was not selling jewels to escape the family. She was selling them to save his daughter. By dawn, the Rinaldi family learned a rule every empire built on loyalty should fear. A guard's family is not a leash. A wife's silence is not betrayal. And no oath should ever be stronger than the life it was meant to protect.